right, welcome to the Detroit Lions podcast. Whoa. What's going on? Welcome to Detroit Lions podcast. What a crazy start to it. You heard the music, you heard the whole thing. So it is what it is. Obviously, we did not do a game podcast after the Green Bay Packers Detroit Lions game because, well, if you look where I'm at right now, I am in my basement at home, and this is where I do my podcast. And it backed up with sewage on Sunday, which was a bad omen for the Lions. Also, was a bad omen for the Lions was my newborn baby of 2 months. She shit herself and she ruined her Lions onesie. So that is what it is. The Detroit Lions did not have a good game against the Green Bay Packers, and we all know about that. What a horrendous game that was when we talk about from the final to the end. And look, a lot of people overreacted over the last couple of days. I'm glad actually didn't do the podcast after the game because I would have overreacted at the same time. I did a video a couple of days ago talking about the Green Bay Packers and Detroit Lions football game. And, as I've gone along and watched that game over and over again, I think I've watched it a period of 4 times. A period of 4 times. What I came away with, sorry about that. I'm plugging in my computer because it's spazzing out. But what I came away with over that course of the Green Bay Packers game versus Detroit Lions was 2 things. One, they didn't play as bad as it seemed. Now, I know for a lot of people, it seemed horrendously bad. The Lions played arguably one of the worst games I've ever seen them play since the Baltimore game, but they just didn't come to play. And you could see some kinks in the armor, whether it's the interior of the offensive line, whether it's the pass rush, which wasn't getting home. We're going to get to a statistic that just marveled me, but we'll get to that in a few. But over and over again, I kept looking at it. I watched the game 3-4 times on the all 22 just to see what the difference was. I got to the third one. I came away thinking there's not much to fix except communication. Now, when Dan Campbell talked about on the radio on Tuesday, he said communication was the biggest issue. And to me, it was the biggest issue. He said the communication was the biggest issue for Dan Campbell. And I came away thinking the same thing. Now, I got the opportunity, the chance to talk to someone who he used to be a college coach in the SEC. And the one thing he told me was, Tate Radlich, Christian Mahogany, Graham Glasgow, right? You got a center who is the leader of that group, might be on the downside of his career. You never quite know. You got Mahogany, who's making his first road start, I think. I didn't go back in the game logs, but I'm pretty sure it was his first road start. You got Tate Radlich, who's making his first start in the NFL. He played at Georgia, but that doesn't really matter. And what this coach said from who I talked to, he said this simple but eloquent thing that I did not think about in terms of the Detroit Lions versus Green Bay Packers. And it was simply, you can play on the road as a veteran. You can play on the road as a veteran. But when you're a rookie or a young player and you go on the road for the first time, that's when you really learn, welcome to the NFL. And I didn't think about it like that because, fans don't think about those type of things. I don't think fans think about the road environment, what it means. Now, in Detroit, we have Ford Field, which is a huge home field advantage for the Detroit Lions. But think about it. You're Tate Radlich, you're Christian Mahogany, you're a young player, you're on the road, your communication is different. You're on a silent count, it's different. And you're going to have to figure out things pretty quickly. Now, when I was talking to this guy, he made it really just, he was like, look, there's a lot of things that the Detroit Lions can get better at. And I was like, yeah. He's like, communication is the biggest one. And I heard that from Dan Campbell on Tuesday, and I was like, hub be darn, man. Hub be darn. That is exactly what he was saying about the communication behind the road, the young players, all that jazz. Very, very interesting situation. Now, when we talk about the Detroit Lions versus Green Bay Packers in terms of the way that they played, I didn't think it was as bad as the final score indicated. Look, they played one of the worst games I've seen them play in quite some time. No shocker there. But what I saw from them was simply they played a good game in the second half. I thought the defense in the second half was really good. I thought there's opportunities for the Detroit Lions to take advantage of. Now, when you look at that missed interception by Alex Anzalone, when you look at the callback interception by Brian Branch, all those things go into conjunction. You know, when you talk about it like this, like think about it. How different would that game have been if the Detroit Lions picked off Jordan Love for a touchdown? How different? It would have been exponentially different. And then you think about it from the Alex Anzalone pick perspective. If he would have made the pick, could have changed everything. In my opinion, it was about 3 or 4 plays. That's it. That's it. There was 3 or 4 plays that the Detroit Lions could have capitalized on. They didn't. They lost the game. And usually when you lose a game by the magnitude of what the Detroit Lions lost by, it's usually because the team that you're playing either if you're a Lions perspective, they gave up the plays that they should have got. They should have got the interception. They should have got the Alex Anzalone interception. They should have got the pick six. You know, those little moments in the game, they are so huge in terms of the way things go. So when I looked back at it, the Lions could have played better. Correct. Absolutely. The interior of the offensive line has to get better, but the communication was a little bit different. I expect them to be a lot better this go around. But look, the final score wasn't as bad as it indicated for the Detroit Lions. I thought there was opportunities, and I think you could take a lot out of those opportunities. And I think that Dan Campbell and I think that Johnny Morton and Calvin Shepard, they're going to take things out of this game, and they're going to be like, okay, let's get to the root of the cause of what happened and where we're going from here. So that is the key right there. So a lot of people want to know my opinion, but, you look around the NFL, there was the Eagles struggling on defense. They have young players, and they were at home, okay? You're going to see it all over the NFL. There's going to be games that you lose. There's going to be teams that get blown out. This is the NFL. Like I just said a couple moments ago, if you don't capitalize on those little opportunities and those little chances of momentum, you're going to lose. You're going to lose quickly, and it's going to turn into a huge, huge deficit because the NFL is unforgiving, man. In college football, you can make a couple mistakes and win the game, but like last year when the Detroit Lions had 5 interceptions in the Houston Texans game, that's not normal that you win that game. So, but the Detroit Lions capitalized on their opportunities in that game, or else it could have been a lot worse. So that was my thoughts about the Green Bay Packers versus Detroit Lions game. Otherwise, the game itself was nauseating to watch in real time. Watching it in the All-22 was a little bit different. Thought there was things that the Detroit Lions could have got better at, and they will get better at, but it is what it is. So let's hear from Calvin Shepard talking about his team and his defense.
Good. I just want to open up with starting with obviously addressing week 1 against Green Bay. Obviously, we left Lambeau with a loss on the wrong side of the day there, but I really want to dive into the game real briefly and just put everything out there as far as how I saw it. So coming off the field, you guys know ultra competitive nature of the game. My temperament and things, I was pissed, and I'm ready to scald everybody. But then you sit back and look at it, and after the second time and after the third time, you go, there's a lot of good football on this tape. We played 47 snaps defensively, and they had 188 passing yards, 78 rushing. So if you look at an NFL game and you tell me the Green Bay Packers are going to have 188 passing yards and 78 rushing, did you play a winning brand of football? I would tell you yes, but then you have to look deeper into that. So what happened? Why did we give up 27 points? And it's a lot of things that go into that, a lot of different variables that go into that. But let's start with the pass game. 188 yards. Well, I believe it was play 18, 19 of the game. We had back-to-back plays where we allowed a 48-yard explosive pass and a 17-yard explosive touchdown pass that we went into the game saying, you got to make these guys beat us. You cannot give them things because that's when they thrive. You have to make them beat us, and we did not do that on back-to-back plays. Inexcusable, and that's been addressed. So you take, what is that, 48-17? I'm not a math major, but I believe that's 65 yards. You take that off of 180, you're looking at 120 yards passing on the day. Let's go into the run game. We held them to 3.1 rushing. That's a good day in the NFL against a back like that. It's a good day. But we should have been dominant in the run game. We should have been at 2.2. Why do I say that? Because one of those was a 15-yard explosive run that should have never happened. That's been addressed as well. So when you go in the day, it's a lot of good to take for it. So 47 plays, I just gave you 3. Where you 2.2 in the run game and 120 yards passing. That's who we are. And that's who I expect us to be, and that's who we will be. And it's non-negotiable. And all this stuff has been addressed with the people it need to be addressed with. And more importantly, the players are holding each other accountable. And in the NFL, that's why each practice, each rep you get, each opportunity you get on that grass is so critical and important because you never know which one is going to be the one. You never know. You can't leave the game playing this game up. We played good defense on 40 snaps, but 7 snaps. We're not doing that this year. You're going to pull your weight. I'm going to pull my weight. The staff's going to pull their weight. And we're moving on to Chicago. And I'm looking for us to play up to the standard that we're capable of playing up to. Any questions?
So you hear it there from Kelvin Shepherd. Like, look, 3 plays in his imagination, that's exactly what caused the game to get away from him. And that's exactly what I'm trying to say. Look, you could look at it several different ways with the Detroit Lions. You could look at it 2 ways. You could say they got their ass kicked, or you could say there was 3 to 4 plays that they could have changed the course of the game. And that's just the reality of the sport. That's the reality of sports in general. Like, there's 3 to 4 moments in a game where you could change the momentum, you can change what's happening, you could make a game-changing play, and that's what changes the whole complexion of the game. We've seen it before with the Detroit Lions. I mean, I can't tell you enough. Like, when we were losing games with Jim Caldwell, like these absorbent games that we shouldn't have lost, it was because of lack of focus. And there was times where Detroit literally snatched victory from the jaws of defeat. It's insane. But you look at it like that, it's 3 to 4 plays. And Jim Caldwell is right. It's 3 to 4 plays in every NFL game that you could look back at and say, that's the reason that you lost, and that's the reason that it got away from you. And that's it. And I've always followed that philosophy because it's true. You got 3 to 4 plays in a game where if you don't make the right play, you're screwed. You're just screwed. So I thought Kelvin Shepherd right there put together a very good synopsis of what I was trying to say in that first segment. So let's get on to the Bears and the Lions game preview. Obviously, this game is going to be a critical game for the Detroit Lions. There's no doubt about it. When you think about who you got coming up next after the Bears, you got the Baltimore Ravens. And they look pretty damn good in week 1. I'm just about to say that. But they looked really good. And you're going to have to go to their place. And we all know Lamar Jackson's record against NFC teams. He only has like 2 losses. So you can assume it's going to be a loss and hope for a win. That's kind of where I'm at. I hope it's a win, but I'm going to assume it's a loss. I would be thrilled if it was a win. But statistics are statistics, and that's the way it goes. So when you look at the offenses comparison in 1 week's time, Detroit's offense, obviously, with 1 week looked horrible, and they looked worse than the Chicago Bears. So this is just crazy. But you look at the defenses too, 266. I mean, the Lions defense actually did play good in that game in the second half, especially. But the 27 points, the 40% on third down would be top 15 in the league. So they did pretty good on defense. But this is 1 week. 1 week does not concise the whole season. So when you think about what's going to happen in this game, let's hear from Dan Campbell about what he thinks about this game, about week 1 and going into this game.
So really, it's kind of what we talked about last night. We just weren't good enough third down, really on either side of the ball. And we kind of dug ourselves in a hole early in that game that we couldn't quite get out of. We had some miscommunication, some MAs that really cost us at the worst times. A couple of penalties that bit us, and it wasn't clean. It wasn't clean. We didn't play well. So, but as I mentioned, it's all stuff we can clean up. We gotta score 7 when we get in the red zone. That's going to be big for us. We got to be able to run the ball. We had a lot of things where just fundamentally, man, we were off. We got to get our fundamentals back. We got to go back to work. Because it really is that simple. Nothing's easy about it, but it's that simple to diagnose. And so the only way you do it, you just got to go back to work, and work those things. Defensively, I thought we settled down in the second half. We gave us some explosives early. And there again, a couple of those are communication errors, things that we had worked all week. So, we got to get back to the basics there. Special teams, we got to be better. Wasn't good enough. We had 2 or 3 players played really well, but not enough. So that was really the story. We just didn't have enough good performances, and really we didn't coach well enough, and that obviously starts with me. We had a lot of MAs, and so that tells me that we had too much on their plate, which is that's my fault. So that was really the story.
So you heard Dan Campbell there. Dan Campbell was talking about, the game on Sunday, and then, St. Brown talked about the game on Sunday. I know that I went into the game preview a little bit prematurely, but you see right here, St. Brown, it says, this is St. Brown from the St. Brown podcast. It says, you get in the red zone, you always want to come away with some points. If we do that, your chances win to go up drastically. And then he said, on the offensive coordinator struggling, and the offense struggling when Ben Johnson's first started, it wasn't all glitz and glamour to start with. And look, everyone knows that. Everyone sees that. It's going to be a transitional period, but it has to be a little bit easier to go about things. It can't just be, how do you want to say it? It can't just be a total flop. Like, you can't be a total flop. That's the key part of it. And, it is what it is. But Dan Campbell talked about the expectations and how they've changed. Look at this. Dan Campbell on if he's surprised at how negative some Lions fans are now. After last week's performance, no, because that's where the standards are at now. And that means we've risen above where we were at one time. And he goes back to his first year where they were absolutely terrible. And that's where it came from. So, look, when we look at this game coming up, there's 2 things that got to get better. Obviously, when you have Graham Glasgow and Taylor Decker, were 2 of the 5 worst linemen in run blocking grade per Pro Football Focus. That's going to get you in some trouble. And we also learned that Decker has an injury. Taylor Decker says he's dealing with an undisclosed injury, and he's hopefully he's going to play. Now, Johnny Morton said today that he expects Taylor Decker to play. So we'll see. Like I said, anything could happen. Now, if Taylor Decker is out, that means that Giovanni Manu will be the starting tackle. Obviously, Dan Skipper hasn't been practicing with the practice squad. So it opens up a very, very interesting opportunity for Giovanni Manu. And depending on your situation of what you think Giovanni Manu can do, that could be where you're at that point. And that would be a little bit risky because he's in his first NFL game. He's going to be starting, like if Taylor Decker couldn't go. And that's a huge, huge thing. And when we look at the injury reports for both teams, these are Thursday's injury reports. Kyler Gordon and Grady Jarrett did not practice for the Chicago Bears. Josh Blackwell, TJ Edwards, and Jediah Walker and Roshan Johnson, the running back, they were limited. Jalen Johnson and DJ Moore were full practice. For the Detroit Lions, tackle Taylor Decker, shoulder injury. He did not practice. Trevor Nowatzki was limited with the elbow injury. Sione Vaki was limited. Terrion Arnold was a full practice. Jack Campbell was a full practice. And Daniel Thomas, the safety, was a full practice with a hand injury. So, look, there is a lot of things that can go wrong over the course of the next couple of days to where Taylor Decker can get downgraded out with the way that he played on Sunday, seeing that he had one of the worst run blocking grades of his career. It's easy to see that he has an injury, and hopefully he can play. But it'll be a very, very interesting thing for the Detroit Lions. Now going on to the Green Bay Pack, I mean the going on to the Chicago Bears. Sorry about that. And the Detroit Lions game preview. We were just hitting on some of the things that were before. We went on a little bit of the game preview, but we were just showing the statistics from last week, and that really don't matter because it's week one and nothing really matters. More emphasized today that the Lions OC says no one is in panic mode. Says Sunday was about execution, and they are going to take a little off the players, play faster. That'll be interesting. Kelvin Shepard says, this is what I told you. This was a tweet from what the video was that I played earlier in the thing. And then Sewell talked about the expectations of the offensive line. He says, it's from Brad Galley. Penei Sewell said that the Lions offensive line had poor play by our standard. Against the Packers, he cautions against panic, though. It's week one with a new team. We got new guys and part of the five up front and the other three. It's our job to bring them up the other two. Just look, I don't think any player on the Detroit Lions, I don't think any coach on the Detroit Lions, and I don't think any member of that team is thinking that last week was an indication of who they're going to be. So when we look at the Detroit Lions versus Chicago Bears, and I want to reiterate a couple stats for you because I think those are the most important. Here's three stats that really matter. Here's Caleb Williams aligned under center for 33 of 63 snaps in week one against the Vikings, a net increase of 24.5 from the Bears' usage of under center formations in 2024, which was 27.7. Williams completed 8 of his 13 passes at 61.5% from under center for 52 yards and a touchdown. From his set, Williams completed 64% of his passes for 8 yards per attempt and 3 touchdowns and 2 interceptions. It seems like from the way Ben Johnson coached in game one that they're going to be under center a lot more than they were in the past. And it's interesting because when you think about these two teams, obviously Ben Johnson was the Detroit Lions offensive coordinator. So Kelvin Shepard knows all about what he's about and knows what he's going to do. And Ben Johnson is a crafty mind. He's a smart guy, but the reality of the situation is when you think about it from Kelvin Shepard's perspective, he went against Ben Johnson in practice. He knows what Ben Johnson's tendencies are. And I'm sure Ben Johnson knows Kelvin Shepard's tendencies, to be honest. But it's going to be a very key matchup in terms of the coaching with Ben Johnson and Kelvin Shepard. Now, when you think about the Bears and the Lions, you think about Jared Goff averaged 3.9 second time to throw in week one's matchup against the Packers, his longest average time to throw in a game since 2022. He was 19 of 23 with a time to throw of 2.5 and 4 seconds, 82% of the time. This was the most he's had since a game since 2022. The last season, the Bears allowed the third highest explosive rate, 24%, and the fifth most yards per attempt at 8.9 to opposing quarterbacks on rhythm throws. So there's a statistic that can go into the mind of Jared Goff. I think Jared Goff is going to – I think the team is going to play a lot better, and obviously for him to get that much time with a rookie guard and the guy starting his third game in Christian Mahogany – pretty impressive to see the time to throw. Now, the interesting thing about Sunday's game, and I didn't even understand how this is true, but the week one, 4-man pass rush defensive success rate leaders, the Denver Broncos were the number one team at 73.9. The Detroit Lions were 69.2. They were second in the league at 69.2. And the Bears were fifth at 61.9. Why am I bringing this up? Because the pass rush, unlike what people think, was a little bit better than people originally thought. And look, you're going against a team in the Chicago Bears who I don't think their best game was last weekend either, because when you think about it from their perspective, they allowed some good pressure last week. The Chicago Bears team, I'm pulling up the statistics right now, but their pass blocking, they allowed 13 pressures. Braxton Jones, who Aiden Hutchinson will go up against, he had 5 pressures by himself. Drew Dalman had 3 pressures, so Tyreek Williams has a chance there. Joe Thuney had 2 pressures. Jonah Jackson had 2 pressures. So when you think about it from that perspective, the Detroit Lions have a really good shot to get at Caleb Williams, get him down to the ground. And the key is not allowing him to get outside the pocket. That's the major key when you play a guy like Caleb Williams. You don't want him to get outside the pocket. You don't want him to make you pay. And that's probably the reason that why the Detroit Lions did not re-sign Zadarius Smith, because I said in a previous podcast, I said I watched Zadarius Smith against the Buffalo Bills, and there was a play where he ran up field, and Josh Allen made him pay. Josh Allen got outside the pocket, made this incredible throw. I think it was a Keon Coleman, and that's probably one of the reasons that Zadarius Smith isn't with the Detroit Lions. So when I look at the matchup of the offensive line for the Detroit Lions versus the Chicago Bears, the Bears gave up 13 pressures last week. They gave up 1 sack, but when you think about it like this, it was just a terrible game for them in terms of their team. No, actually, you know what? I read it wrong. They didn't give up 13. They gave up 23 pressures. 23 pressures. Braxton Jones had 6. I was looking at the true pass set. Braxton Jones had 6. Cole Kmet had 1. Jonah Jackson had 5. Drew Dalman had 4. Joe Thuney had 4. Okay. I was wrong. I read the statistic wrong. I was reading it on the Pro Football Focus site, and it's that's not good for them. Now, when you look at the pass rush for the Chicago Bears, can they win against your team? Now, the best player on the Chicago Bears roster in terms of win rate was Diego Obahanago. He recently played for the Dallas Cowboys. Deo was on the other side of Micah Parsons. Last week he had a 15.8 win rate. He had 2 hurries, he had 1 sack, and he had 3 total pressures. When you think about it like that, I think that's a pretty damn good statistic right there. Montez Sweat, who a lot of people talk about, his win rate on Monday night was 0%. Alrighty. And, that's some of the things that you get into talking about the Chicago Bears. So when you talk about them, it seems like they have such talent. You look at Roma Dunze, DJ Moore, Luther Burden, Colston Loveland, the rookies, Luther Burden and Colston Loveland. Obviously Michigan fans know who Colston Loveland is. They have a lot of talent. DeAndre Swift had a good week last week, and when we think about what DeAndre Swift did last week, he was pretty solid in terms of the way that he ran the ball. And obviously we know it's only a matter of fact until DeAndre Swift gets dinged up, because he usually does. Now, when we talk about the Bears defense versus the Lions offense, the Bears aligned their cornerbacks in press coverage on 38.8% of their coverage snaps in week 1. The Lions in matchup in 2024, the Lions wide receivers faced press coverage at the 4th lowest rate in the NFL, 18.6. But averaged 10.1 yards per target, second most, and the league high 76.4 catch rate when given less than 3 yards of cushion. So if the Bears want to play, if the Bears want to come out and they want to play press against the Detroit Lions, it's going to backfire huge in their mind. Because if you think about it like this, the Lions have been really good in press coverage. They have the guys to really make you pay. St. Brown, Jameson Williams, and the guy who's coming along is Isaac Tesla. Johnny Morton talked about him today. He said that his role will be expanded in the offense. So when you think about it like that, obviously think about what Isaac Tesla is going to be. And when I look at the Chicago Bears and their defense, they could be a ton better, but it is what it is. Now, the interesting thing about the Chicago Bears, in my opinion, is the They had 12 penalties last week. 12 penalties. They were 20, that's 29th in the NFL. Obviously, we were only in the week 1, but that's a pretty sizable mark. And when you think about it like this, the Chicago Bears, um, they got to be a lot better in terms of the way that they play, but they did not have a great game in their first game against the Vikings, and they were home. Now they got to come on the road, and Ben Johnson even said they're going to be on a silent count, so you can expect that they're going to jump or they're going to have a lot of false starts in terms of what they're doing, and that's going to be the key thing right there. Now, as we look at we're not going to talk about the advantages that the Bears have because we don't know what the advantages the Bears have. We don't know what advantages the Lions have. Now, NFL.com did the game picks, and they had Daniel Jeremiah has the Lions, Colleen Wolfe has the Lions, Adam Rank, who's a known Bears slappy, has the Bears, Bucky Brooks has the Bears. Most of the panel is picking the Detroit Lions, and that's going to be interesting to see. Now, I was listening to Johnny Morton talk today. I want to play you that sound. It was very interesting what he had to say.
I think St. Brown's unbelievable. He's the captain. He makes this thing go, with Jared. Those guys are just all, and Panay. Those three guys, their attitude just uplifts everybody. And every day they bring it. And it's just so awesome to see those guys. And I mentioned to you before, it's like Anquan Bolden. It's the same type of guy, man. What do we got to do? How do we do this? Okay, and he's helping everybody. Saint's grown over the last few years since the last time I was here. He's a captain, and he should help everybody. And it's all about what do we got to do to win. That's what we're all about. Whatever it takes. No egos here ever. And whatever it takes, man, let's do it.
So you heard Johnny Morton talk about the culture that they have there. And look, when we talked about it earlier in the podcast about are you worried about the Detroit Lions? And when I think about being worried about the Detroit Lions, I told you I watched the game film 2 or 3 times because I'm a sicko. But when I watched the game film, I came away thinking that the Detroit Lions are better than they played. And Kelvin Shepard felt the same. We played his sound earlier. Johnny Morton talking about, Sewell, Goff, and St. Brown as huge captains. Those guys are great in the locker room. And I think the one thing that's different from past Detroit Lions teams in terms of the way that things have been going is you have leadership. When things go wrong, you need leadership. When things aren't going the correct way, you need leadership. And the only way you get steered in the right direction is with leadership. When we talk about a captain manning the ship, if he doesn't do a good job leading the ship is probably going to sink or crash into or ground, one of the two. Now I look at this and I go, look, the interior offensive line was a problem, but I'm not going to overreact in week 1. There's no reason to overreact in week 1. Do I like Aiden Hutchinson dropping into coverage on pass coverage? No, I don't. And I don't think that's going to become a staple with the Detroit Lions. But look, they had an identity. Shep was talking about that there's 3 or 4 plays that they could have made, and they didn't. And that's the way it goes. And when you think about the Detroit Lions at this point in time, there's a lot to be said about where they're at right now. There's a lot to be said where they're at. So it's going to be interesting to see what they do in this game coming up. I'm very interested to see how they overcome where they were last week. Because when you think about last week in terms of a fan perspective, there was no possible way that they get out of that game unscathed if they don't come up with the plays that they should have came up with. We talked about it earlier. The interceptions, Alex Anzalone, Brian Branch, those could have changed the game. So when you think about it this time around against the Chicago Bears, they have to capitalize on their opportunities. In the years past, last year especially, they capitalized on a lot of opportunities that they had in front of them. And it just seemed like Sunday they did not capitalize on none of the opportunities they had in front of them. So when we look at the game keys for me in terms of what I think this team has to do going against the Chicago Bears, it's pretty simple. they got to capitalize on opportunities, whether it's the red zone, whether it's turnovers, whether it's turnover worthy passes that Caleb Williams will give you at sometimes. Because when we look at Caleb Williams from his passing, I mean, he was, I don't know why it's not coming up. When we look at Caleb Williams, he was pretty efficient in terms of the way he passed. But again, when you get him off kiltered, he can make mistakes. And when I look at him, he had 0 turnover worthy passes last week, but he could throw the ball with the best of them. Now, when you get pressure on him, his completion percentage drops 12%. When he's not blitz, his completion percentage is 80%. So what I see the Detroit Lions doing Sunday, they're going to blitz the hell out of Caleb Williams, because when he gets blitzed, his completion percentage is, I think it's, let me see what it is, because it's not showing up right now. His completion percentage when he's blitzed is 33.3. His completion percentage when he's blitzed is 33.3. So when you think about it from the Detroit Lions perspective, what are you going to do to win this game? There's 2 things. You're going to blitz the hell out of Caleb Williams. You're going to make him feel pressured. 4-man pressure against Caleb Williams, and you're going to get sliced and diced, because when he had pressure in week 1, he was 54.5% completion percentage. 11 for 6 for 11 there. When he was kept clean, 62.5% of the time, he had a completion percentage. 80% when not blitz, that was his completion percentage. So again, you're going to blitz. I think the Detroit Lions have to blitz you when you talk about Caleb Williams, because when he is blitzed, he has become a huge issue when he does get blitzed. So that'll be very, very interesting from that perspective. Now, same for the offense. The offense has to do the same thing. They have to capitalize on their opportunities. There are several times they got in the red zone and they should have capitalized, and they just did not capitalize on their opportunities. That is the reality of the situation. So when we look at what you have to do against the Chicago Bears, capitalize on all your opportunities. You don't know how many opportunities you're going to get. They're very scarce in a game. It's a chance to kind of put yourself above it and figure out what you're going to do. So your opportunities really do matter. And then for the second part, the offense has to be a lot better. Obviously, it's not scoring a touchdown until the 4th quarter with that amazing Tesla grab. That's not going to win you many games either. So the Detroit Lions have to do better on offense, obviously. We're not going to hit and throw this, but the reality of the situation is Detroit Lions need to play a lot better. And there's not really much to say outside of that. There's really not much to say outside of the fact that the Detroit Lions need to play a lot better against the Chicago Bears. You could sit here all day long and talk about what they should do, what they should not do. It's just go win the game. Like Dan Campbell said earlier in the podcast, expectations have changed. He knows it. The team knows it. There's a bigger opportunity here for the Detroit Lions to make things happen. But they got to go out there and they got to do things. Now, when we look at the Bears and the Lions, this is one stat that I want to leave you with. The Lions use man coverage on 47.8% of their that's I did that one. Jared, oh my God. I lost the statistic. Okay. It is what it is. So when we look at the Detroit Lions, I think this is a huge game for them, because we talked about it earlier. This game, when you think about it from the perspective of where you got to go to Baltimore, and you got to play Cleveland, you got to play Cincinnati, you got to play Kansas City, you got to play the Bucks. Like, that's all before the bye. So if the interior of the offensive line does not get better, because they were totally bad on Sunday, when you look at the teams that you're going to be facing, Matabukwe, the week 3, week 4 you got Mason Graham and Ty Shelton. Then week 5 you got B.J. Hill. Week 6 you got Chris Jones. Week 7 you got Vita Vea. So the Lions have to be better. Now, everyone read the clippings about them being the third best roster in football, from the Athletic to the ESPN, wherever you got your news. They just have to go prove it. Some of the kinks that need to be worked out in terms of what happened on Sunday, that's all going to happen. But the Detroit Lions have to go out there and make things happen, because when we talk about what they did last week was just an opportunity missed. A total opportunity missed. So that is what it is, and that's where we're going to leave it. Not a lot to say in this podcast, to be honest. I was going to have another person on here, but there was scheduling conflicts, and I had to come up with the podcast because I didn't do the post-game podcast. So we will do the post-game podcast after the game against the Chicago Bears. We'll upload it to Spotify and Apple right after, so you have it for Monday morning. Monday morning, we're probably going to do a podcast at Three Kings. We're going to talk about the Pro Football Focus grades and all that jazz. And then you'll get another podcast on probably Wednesday or Thursday. So we'll talk to you after the game. Obviously, you can go to JC Sports. Usually daily, there's Lions content. But I have been slacking because I had my basement totally get flooded. So this game is a huge game for the Detroit Lions. There's no other way to put it. I think till I'm blue in the face, I think we could say this is going to be a tough game, but I mean, everyone knows that. There's no reason to keep reiterating that. But what's on deck for the Detroit Lions is Baltimore. And it's really important to get a win against Chicago, because if you don't, you put yourself in a really big hole, and you're asking to go beat Baltimore with Lamar Jackson, who has been absolutely deadly against the NFC. That's not going to help. We'll see you guys in the next podcast. We talk more Detroit Lions football here on the Detroit Lions News podcast. I will see you in the next podcast. We'll talk more Detroit.